My name is Maret Thatcher. I have been in construction for basically my whole life, like some of you. I had a family business in construction. My mother found her niche in concrete testing and in flagging. So you know those like stop, slow. That was me all through my teenage years, paying for college. So give them a break. Got to be nice to those flaggers. Also, hot day. They love it if you roll down your window and hand them a water bottle. Seriously, makes their whole day. So I started as a flagger, paid for law school that way, and then construction called back to me in the form of construction technologies. So I tried on a Hololens that was showing the BIM of a building that had just been built. And so I'm in this already built building, seeing through this essentially walls, like an X-ray view to the 3D modeling that had been done beforehand. And I was just mind blown. I quit law fairly quickly after this and started my own company. And now I'm here at this construction tech panel. I'm really excited to be introducing Alice. Alice joins us from Brick and Mortar Ventures. This is one of the few construction startup firms, like VC firms in the country. It's one of the best. Alice has an educational background in electrical engineering. I did a little digging on her. She does motorcycles as well. Like, this is a cool lady. She began her time in construction at DPR, doing major hospitals and data centers, and then actually moved to Singapore to start up the DPR Southeast Asian branch. Everybody, welcome Alice. Yay, Alice. And then I have Brooke with me here today. Brooke is at Skanska, an innovation powerhouse. And she actually went to the Jacob Institute for Design and Innovation while getting her degree in civil engineering at Berkeley. So now she's a senior development engineer at Skanska and drives innovation for new technology adoption all over Oregon. She facilitates national technology pilots and enterprise rollouts. So she's got a lot of great insights for us today. I'm so excited to welcome both Brooke and Alice today. And we're all working in these sort of like different areas in construction technology. I'm kind of coming from the technologist side where I'm really actively trying to develop. Brooke is actively implementing into projects all over Oregon, and it sounds like for Skanska Enterprise. And Alice is in this position where she's constantly evaluating new and upcoming construction technologies and getting at it from an investment perspective. So this is a really, really great group today. So my first question, I asked these ladies some fast facts before we joined today, and I said, hey, what are your favorite trees? We're at a timber conference. Everybody in the chat, if you have a favorite tree, would you please tell us? And I'm going to ask Alice first. Alice, you told me your favorite tree, and I loved it so much. Do you recall what you said there?
I don't remember.
I do remember because I have your list. You said sequoia.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I think a lot of that just has to do with growing up here in California. The mass, trees all around the northern part of California. And yeah, I just feel like, growing up around this kind of more, I guess in San Francisco, it's not as, sporty and outdoorsy as Portland. But I think growing up in the area, as a child, you kind of take these road trips with your family, you go out and look at the wilderness and you look at these big trees. So I think it's more of a homage to my home state of California.
I think that there's a lot, and when I talk to people about this particular question, there's so much in our youths about like trees. We have memories of trees. So for myself, it was a dogwood tree that we had out in our front yard. And it was so beautiful, and it's probably a pretty useless timber product, but it's gorgeous. Brooke, you had a tree that was from your childhood as well.
Yeah, my favorite tree was a willow tree that we had in my backyard. And it was a pretty tricky tree to climb just because of where the branches started. So my brother and I used to always climb like the benches. We'd basically make like an impromptu ladder so that we could get up in this willow tree and just hang out. And it was always an excuse to have a picnic. And so we would raid the snack cabinet and just eat all of our favorite snacks up in the tree. So really good memories in willows.
I love that story. Oh my gosh. And what I think, okay, so with this mass timber conference, like when I first saw the mass timber being used as a building material, I I think it called to me some of that childhood memories of just like being in trees and this beautiful building product. So I'm really curious about when the first time you heard about mass timber being used, and do you recall some of the conversations that were happening around that? Either of you?
Yeah, I really remember CLT taking off in 2018. It seemed like all of a sudden we just had so many projects that were using mass timber. And I remember being really excited. It was like this new thing, and Skanska had so many opportunities to work with this medium. Just in the Portland area alone, we had 4 projects, 2 different schools, also using a lot of mass timber out at the PDX airport, and then also the Beaverton Public Safety Center. So all those projects, we were able to see mass timber being used in different ways. Out at PDX upcoming, we have these mass plywood panels that are going to be used for the roofing structure for a 400,000 square foot roof that's going to be using mass timber. So pretty insane engineering challenge to put all of that together. And then also for some of our other schools, just using CLT diaphragm and glue lamp beams to create that structure. And I think there's also really interesting tie-in to sustainability, but then also to earthquake resiliency. A lot of these buildings, we're able to really look at how we can make these buildings more safe and earthquake resistant using this material as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember seeing around 2018, Skanska, Portland, lots of these mass timber buildings popping up, and just thinking they were so beautiful. And I personally had a lot of questions about them. You know, I think the sustainability misconception, I remember hearing some folks with just a little bit of environmental knowledge thinking, oh, well, we shouldn't be chopping down trees and using them in this way. And so it was really an opportunity to educate people about, you know, carbon sequestering and the ecology of building materials. What about you, Alice? Have you had an opportunity to participate in any CLT projects, or do you recall any conversations about them when they first started happening?
Yeah, so I personally have not been on a project that utilized any type of mass timber, but I think interestingly, I actually learned about it during my time in Singapore. So it wasn't, you know, while I was working here in the US, it was while in Singapore, probably in like 2017, 2018. And the interesting thing about Singapore is, like, around Southeast Asia, you know, I think they kind of look towards, you know, what's going on in the US, Australia, as well as Europe in terms of new technologies and innovations. And Singapore in particularly, they tried to bring in a lot of the new methods of construction into their country to increase, you know, productivity and also look at sustainability. So I actually learned about mass timber from putting in a bid for a project that was using kind of mass timber as, you know, a source of material. And through that journey, I actually learned, you know, the whole, well, I learned that, you know, in Europe, it's kind of been around for a lot longer. And then in Australia, there was like one plant that was doing it. And I think back in the day, in the US, there was still not as many factories that were able to produce, you know, these products that we can use on the construction sites. So I thought it was super interesting to see, you know, this, you know, different parts of the world were kind of starting to utilize this new product. And, you know, I got the opportunity to kind of learn a little bit about, you know, what were some of the reasons why people chose to use that. So aside from the sustainability, and Brooke, you mentioned, you know, from a seismic perspective, I think it's just the look is, you know, from an architectural perspective, you can have, you know, a lot of exposed, you know, wood, and it's just like, the look is just so aesthetically beautiful. And I know one of the projects that we kind of looked at while in Singapore to learn from was a building for the National University of Singapore. And they actually used, I think it was CLT, to create kind of this like wave structure roof. And it was just like the most beautiful thing that I've seen. And I was like, oh, that is so awesome. Like, yes, there are some challenges from a maintenance perspective and stuff like that. But I think just the architectural feel and being able to be in a building, you know, that looked that way, I think that just changes, you know, a lot of people's perceptions around, you know, wood, as well as, you know, like thinking back to some of the older types of, or not older, but like different types of structures that buildings are made of. So comparing that with like steel and concrete, you know, the wood structure, you kind of get a lot more kind of aesthetics from it, and you can do a little bit more with.
I I completely agree on the aesthetics. I think that's, I mean, that's what drew me into mass timber for sure. I think about like this as a new building material, because it is a new building material, but it's such an old building material. I'm curious, in your experiences, both investment and in looking at new products and technologies to implement, are you looking at building materials often? Do they come up in your line of work, or is it more rare?
I can take this one first.
Sure, go ahead.
So I've been at Brick and Mortar Ventures for almost 2 years now, and we've definitely talked to a lot of companies doing something in green materials or new building materials. But the big challenge, at least from a venture perspective, is that a lot of the timelines for this new type of material to basically infiltrate the market and be kind of more commonplace, whether it's for architects or owners to choose as a material type. I think that timeline just tends to be a little bit longer than the types of companies that we would invest in. Here at Brick and Mortar, we're trying to figure out, how do we work with some of these other partners, whether it's corporate venture capital or other types of funding, to be able to sort of get some of these, companies or new products to a place where, we can kind of come in and help with, the mass scaling. So I think it's a little bit more difficult because, it's not software, and typically venture capitalists invest in software. We don't only invest in software, but there is kind of this thing that you have to think about from a growth and scale perspective. So for us, it's really, we're trying to figure out, do we have other folks in the investing and financing network that can help kind of push, and provide funding for some of these new types of materials to get them to a place where, then it's kind of easier to scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd say also for a lot of.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
For a lot of these materials, they have a lot of times been around for a while, just not at the expanded use that we're starting to see. So I think it's really important to rely on those experienced trades, even if there aren't a lot of those vendors, really looking at their past experience using these materials and then working with them to scale up. So if we have these really big ideas of greater use or these beautiful, massive ceilings, how can we actually consult, hand in hand with the folks that have the most experience with those materials, and make sure that those ideas actually are going to work for that material type, but then work together to maybe draw out some of the innovations and the new ways that we can use that. But really just looking towards those people with that experience. And so far we've experienced they've been exceptional partners for some of these larger ideas.
Wonderful. Oh, that's so cool to hear that that's how it's taking off, trying new materials, is working with, almost like the craftspeople, which is kind of how it should be. So Brooke, you talked about software, and that brings me to my applications question. I'm curious about your favorite apps. I asked both of you this beforehand. In the chat, if you guys want to wake up here, tell us your favorite apps, construction or otherwise. I'm going to go first. The Calm app. Meditations, sleep stories. I'm all about it. It's my favorite thing in the world. And I think I use it almost every day. So when we're talking about applications and software and construction software, we have I think a historically slow adopting, a slow moving industry here. Duolingo, weather apps, I'm seeing them there. I noticed nobody's mentioned their favorite construction application yet. No Procore's? Come on, people. Come on. So I'm curious what both of you think about this. You both had the opportunity to implement construction in the field, in the office. Is construction a slow-moving adopter, or is that changing? Brooke, I'll ask you.
Yeah, I think what I have seen works really well is giving people solutions that they actually need. And I think a lot of times we try to give people tools that they don't actually need or don't actually want. And sometimes we're going to give them a solution that they don't realize they need, but they do need it. And so that's where when we find, these applications are pulling Procore into an app or having Procore models so that you can actually view the models on an iPad while you're out in the field. A lot of the Autodesk BIM 360 products. Those are things that people may not have realized they actually wanted or needed while out in the field, But once you give it to them and they realize, hey, this is actually super valuable to me, people are going to jump on board so quickly. It's really just about finding what those tools are and really understanding the needs of those people. Because if you give something that they don't want and they don't need, you're not going to use it. And I think a lot of times with construction technology, it's really easy to get excited about the new shiny thing and push stuff on people. I also think a lot of times we don't do a good job communicating the why. So we give something to someone that they maybe don't understand, or they don't know why we're changing things. So I found that just being a lot more transparent within those transitions really helps people to get what's going on, just at a very simple level. Hey, we're moving to this new tool because X, Y, Z. This is how we think it can help you. And when you communicate with people like that, and you're really intentional about who's going to be using that at the end of the day, people are so much more likely to jump on board.
That's a great tip. I love that.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I think, drawing back on some of my experience while at DPR, so I kind of, and I think this is, in terms of timeline, I joined the industry when iPads kind of first came out. So I think being able to see, the iPads come into the construction sites was just like, I just kind of felt like, that was a huge game changer. So my first project, it was, that first project was a hospital job, and we started that about the same time as when PlanGrid was just an early startup coming out of Y Combinator. And, the hospital job was a $1.5 billion hospital, and we had, tens of thousands of drawings. And, our goal for that project was to be that, try to have some type of, digital job site in the sense of, bringing, digitizing all the plans and providing everyone with an iPad. So instead of, continuously printing out like drawing sets, every time there was an update, you'd actually save a lot of money just buying the iPad. And you're also not cutting down that many trees, like literally just like printing drawings that are going to be outdated in a month or so. So I would say my favorite construction app is probably PlanGrid. Just, the first project, I didn't get to implement it. We had to, find a roundabout way of dealing with drawings because PlanGrid just couldn't handle the sheer volume of projects. But on my second hospital job, I kind of saw this thing where it was a tool that was put into the hands of a lot of the field. And it got to a point where they just could not live without it. It was like, no, I need my PlanGrid. I need my PlanGrid. And then on my third project here in the Bay Area, we basically got to a point where the superintendent was like, I'm not going to build unless I have PlanGrid. And just seeing that, piece of technology that, before you would think of some of these older guys in the construction site, they were, hesitant to adopt new technology, but seeing this kind of app come into their lives and basically becoming a requirement for them to build, I think that's, it says a lot just doing that. So I think, as we're looking at investment.
That's what, over the course of what, 3 projects? 1, 2, 3 projects, it became this is neat to this is needed.
Yeah, exactly. So just seeing, the faces of, these older people who didn't grow up around technology, just saying that I need this type of technology is just, it's just so gratifying, at least, coming from the person who's trying to help implement tech and bring new tech into the field. So gratifying, such a great experience.
I really identify with that gratification. I'm in the position where we're doing some on-site construction technology, a lot of Hololens, like I mentioned earlier. And it is funny to see some of the oldest guys on site be like, huh, I like this, or one of the old guys saying, oh, this reminds me of video games with my grandson. I'm going to tell him about this. So a lot of gratification when you can see things click and see that whole, all this stuff that you're doing, all this pre-planning, it's there for you. Whether that's in your Bluebeam, whether that's in these job site apps, I think that's really, really important. This is bringing me to my next question. So paint me a picture of the modern construction worker. I personally, I'm thinking they all have iPads. They're all wearing their iPads. They all have these cute little purses for their iPads, but I don't tell them that they're purses because they are like a harness. But when I go to the job site, there's all kinds of ways of wearing your iPad. tell me about the modern construction worker. What are you seeing on your sites? What are they wearing? What's the job site fashion?
Yeah, I would love if everybody had an iPad. I definitely don't think that's the case at the jobs that I walk for our clients. I would say maybe a superintendent, and then maybe a general foreman from our subs, but still really not seeing a whole lot of people walk around the site with iPads. I really think when you talk about, what is that modern construction frontline worker, there are so many different types of people. When I think about that, and that's what makes me most excited, is you're seeing, young women, young men, old women, old men, all these different people that at the end of the day, the one thing that I think that ties them all together is pride in their work. They are all so proud of the things that they're building. And you just see that anytime you go into the job site. My favorite thing is just talking to people and be like, what are you doing? Tell me what you're working on. And everyone's so willing to share what they're doing. And really, you can tell the pride and the care that they're putting into that craft. I was on the job site a few days ago, and I was flying the drone over a site, and I was taking a bunch of videos as we were doing tilt-up concrete panels for a big job. And one of the subcontractors walked up to me and was like, hey, is there any way that I can get that video? I want to show my wife and kids. I want them to see what this project looks like. And so many people, they're stoked on all the drone videos and photos, and they just want to share, this is the thing that I'm building. Do you see that panel? I helped get that up in place. So I think people are really, they're engaged, they're excited about the new technology, and they're just really, at the end of the day, proud of their work.
Thank you for that. I think that is so true. I see that pride every day as well. To the very small extent that I participated in any construction project, it's a thrill to point out to my son, I got to work on that one. And he's like, woo. Alice, what do you think? What is the modern construction worker today? What are they wearing? What are they doing? Who are they?
Yeah, I think I'll come at this more from a, some of the new companies that I'm seeing perspective. So I'm definitely starting to see, a couple of brands pop up. So, just as an example, there's a startup out of Denver called Quality. And what they want to do is, they started off their first product is a new type of boot. And it's really to, reduce the cost of some of the boots for construction workers, and also try to provide this education around why you need to, get new boots every 16, or I think it's 18 to 24 months, because, workers who are working out on site on their feet all day, wearing old construction boots will actually hurt their knees and hurt their back. So it's more of a, safety ergonomics thing. So we're seeing kind of new brands come in to try to also, recreate some of the brands like Red Wing and some of the, more older generation brands, and kind of do a refresh of a new brand for, younger people coming into the construction site. So we're seeing that. We're also seeing a lot more focus on safety of the construction workers. And that's one of the things that I think, is really resonating a lot, because, my dad is a carpenter, and, I know all of the hard work that he's put into the craft. And I know that he has, he has a lot of back pain now as kind of a older person. He's in his 70s, and he has a lot of, kind of physical issues with his body from his work. So I think, nowadays, with more emphasis on safety and people kind of developing wearables to try to provide that feedback of, whether or not you're lifting improperly or doing some of your tasks improperly or in a non-ergonomic way, that's really affecting, the life of a lot of these workers. So we're definitely seeing a little bit more traction on the safety side. And just a shameless plug out there, in terms of, building community around the construction site. We invested in a company called Trade Hounds, which is kind of like an Instagram for construction, where a lot of the pros can actually, post their work and share their work. And, I've been, scrolling through the photos, and it's just incredible to see, a lot of these pros really being able to showcase, look at this beautiful conduit run that is just so perfectly, all the perfect 90s and all that. And there's also a lot of funny stuff on there too. So highly recommend checking out Trade Hounds if you want to get some, inspiration, and also just seeing, what's going on out on the construction site. And they're kind of all over the US now.
Okay, I am writing down trade hounds. Had not heard of it before. That sounds very cool. I love how, like when I think of the modern construction worker, they are sharing. They are social. They're using social media, and I think it's really funny. There's TikTok, of course, is a favorite of mine, and on that application, there is a very fun meme called "A World of OSHA Violations," where to the tune of "A World of Pure Imagination," they sing "A World of OSHA Violations" and showcase funny things on site. This, I'm thinking trade hounds are going to showcase more the other end of it. So I need to check that one out. Thank you very much. I like this idea. Okay, you talked a little bit about it, but some of the wearables, I'm really curious, wearables as an emerging thing we're going to be seeing on a job site, particularly ones that are like robotic assist and helping you move. Brooke, I know you've tried some of this stuff. Would you tell us a little bit about that and where you think it's going?
Yeah, totally. I think there's a huge potential for wearables on the construction sites. And really, when I think about robotics, I do think about like assisted robotics rather than robotics that are going to take the place of the worker. And how can that robotic basically remove a safety hazard or improve the efficiency rather than completely replacing that person's job. Specifically, when we're looking at exoskeletons, a lot of them are looking at how they can help you do your job and reduce some of that strain and wear and tear on your body. So just a few years ago, I tested out a vest from Exobionics called ExoVest, and it essentially supports each arm 15 pounds. So if you're working overhead all day long, you don't really have to worry about your arms getting tired because it's going to carry the weight of your arms and ideally whatever equipment you're holding. One thing we found when we were testing that out is most of the time people are in a harness when they're doing overhead work because they're in a scissor lift, they're elevated. That's at least our Skanska policy requiring people to be harnessed in. And if you're wearing a harness and you have an ExoVest over top of that, it can be a lot harder to move around. And a lot of times those harnesses aren't even compatible with that ExoVest. So that was about 2 years ago when we were testing that. I just checked back in on that vest recently, and they've completely redesigned it so that it's backless. And that's so that the harness can be there without getting inhibited at all by that vest. So we're starting to see these changes. And really, I think the biggest piece is getting that technology into the field so that you can learn from the people that are wearing it to be like, hey, this is cool, but I'm never going to wear this because I need to safely access my harness. I cannot do that with that vest. And then you see that change in the product line. So I think with a lot of this construction technology, I would love to say that we're going to use all of this like next year or the year after, but it just takes some time. It takes some time to figure out what really is going to work. And then also there's a huge culture change, I think, on job sites needed in order for people to be willing to jump in and use that. It's sometimes hard to tell how people are going to react. When I took that to the job site, people were putting it on and they're like, I'm the bionic man. This is awesome. Look at me. But then you take a newly modeled hard hat that's safer, easier to wear, doesn't fog up your goggles with the visor, and people do not want to wear it because where's their stickers from their last 20 years of projects? How are you going to know what they've worked on? And that in some ways comes back to the pride of their work. So it's kind of hit or miss, like what craft workers are willing to engage in and then what they maybe are going to push back against. So it's just so important when we're innovating and trying to get these things into the field that we're working super closely with those people. Goes back to kind of human-centered design, understanding the needs of that end user and making sure that what we're developing and implementing out in the field is really going to work for those people.
It's such an empathetic job. I completely agree with that. Alice, what about you? Have you tried any of these, or what do you think we'll be seeing with regard to site wearables?
Yeah, I actually haven't tried any recently. And I guess this one technically isn't a wearable, but when I was still at DPR, and this was like many years ago, I actually tried on the laser scanning backpack. So I wouldn't call it a wearable in that sense, but it was a, technology that I got to put on, and it was a 60-pound backpack with a ton of sensors. And the whole goal was to walk around site and being able to, do reality capture while you're moving. So instead of, having a laser scanner, putting it in place, letting it scan, moving it, and then scanning it again, like this technology would basically like go like while you're moving, be able to stitch everything together. The technology is definitely a lot more developed now, because this was like, I don't know, 6 to 8 years ago, when, you know, the sensors were a lot bigger and all that. So yeah, I got to see that. And I think, you know, when it comes to wearables, it's been very interesting to kind of, you know, talk to contractors and talk to people in the field and kind of get a sense of how comfortable people are with it. Because I think, you know, when you think of technology and wearables on the construction site, there's also the aspect of, you know, we don't want to be tracked. We don't want Big Brother. We don't want, you know, you knowing like where I'm at. Like, I'm just going to the bathroom. Like, I don't want you to know that I'm going to the bathroom, right? So I think, you know, there has always been kind of this privacy perspective of, you know, bringing wearables onto the construction site, depending on what it is. But I think we're starting to see a little bit of a shift, just because of, you know, COVID-19, the pandemic hitting a lot of our construction sites. You know, there was a requirement around, you know, social distancing and making sure that, you know, people weren't too close to each other and trying to manage that. So we've seen, you know, some of the wearables get a little bit easier adoption out on the construction sites, just coming in from a different angle. But I think, you know, thinking of these wearables from a safety perspective tends to be a lot better than thinking of wearables from a productivity perspective.
Yeah, I agree. Very few people want to be tracked on their way to the restroom. To the extent that they're making the data ambiguous too, I found some more acceptance of those. But the tracking wearables, it's an interesting thing. I see so much potential, so much productivity potential. But we're working with clientele that they can be pretty suspicious about Big Brother. Like, it's not like they don't want to be tracked. So very interesting, very interesting. Okay, audience, time for you again. I'm going to poke you. Favorite video game, past or present? Video games are incredibly important in developing emerging tech skills in young women. My personal favorite, as I think it's Katamari Damacy. I don't know if you've heard of this game. It's called Katamari Damacy. It's like a PlayStation 2 or 3 game, and you roll up garbage into bigger and bigger balls until you're rolling up a city. It's incredibly zen. That's my very favorite game. I asked both of the women here today what their favorite video games were, and I had some illuminating answers. Brooke, would you go first?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up with 3 older brothers, and I was the baby sister. So I got very little time with the controller. I spent a lot of time sitting on the couch watching them play video games. And it was finally until I got my own Game Boy that I was able to actually play video games without them hogging the screen. And I really love Donkey Kong Country just because, I don't know, monkeys are fun, and, you know, you get so much excitement going from a level to the next. So that was definitely my favorite. And I got into it a little bit more just as I grew up and was able to play and push the boys around a little bit. But definitely some fun games there on the Game Boy back in the early days.
So Brooke got to, this is something I talk to lots of women about their video games. This happens all the time. We watch our older brothers, our older cousins play. We don't necessarily feel included, invited, or if we are, we die immediately. And they're like, your turn's over, goodbye. So I liked Brooke's story because once she got access, she was very interested in it. And Donkey Kong, such a good game, such a good game. Throwing those barrels, all about it. Alice, I loved your game too. I played this one as well.
Oh, nice.
What was your favorite video game, past or present?
Yeah, so Final Fantasy VII, and they've actually just recently kind of redone it with better graphics and all that. I haven't played it yet. I have it, but I don't have a PS4. So I think, you know, I have 2 siblings, and, you know, being in a household with siblings, it was a lot easier to, you know, get game consoles because it was like, oh, you know, the kids are going to go entertain themselves. And also you buy one thing and we all kind of share. So I guess as an adult, I can go buy it, but I just like haven't been able to find the time to do it. But I absolutely love Final Fantasy VII. It was a role-playing game. I don't know if people in the audience are familiar, but yeah, it's a lot of fighting mythical creatures, love mythical creatures.
It had graphics too at the time that were just like, oh.
Yeah. So I think I will need to buy a PS4 and play the remake because the graphics are just so much better now. But I still appreciate the graphics back then. I think being able to see, you know, the evolution of graphics in video games has been pretty incredible. And now, we're seeing a lot of AEC technologies being built on gaming platforms, which is just awesome. Super awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think gaming is a really good way for women to get into all kinds of different technologies. And so I bring it up today just so that the folks here can like listen, understand, and see that that can spark interest. So with that question, we have just one more of my prepared questions, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. But I'm curious how, you were invited to the video game table or invited to technology or given opportunities. We're all here today. We all have these amazing careers in construction technology. And for myself, I look back and I think about how I almost opted out and I almost didn't participate. And so I guess what I want to leave the folks here with today is actionable ways they can think about that they themselves can do. It doesn't have to be the corporate way of including women in construction and technology and STEM. So Alice, I'll ask you, because I know you had a great experience at your first firm. How was that for you?
Yeah, so I think at DPR, it was very much the culture. And I think that was the reason why I joined the company. And, back in the day, I didn't know anything about construction, and I didn't ever think that I would go work for a construction company. So I took the chance and took an internship with DPR. And, what really sold me was the culture of innovation. And, it's a flat organization, no business or no titles on business cards. And it was really, kind of this like Silicon Valley-esque construction company. And they really encouraged young people to try out new technologies, rethink processes, and really try to rethink the way that we build so that we continue to innovate. And one of their core values is ever forward. So, continuous self-improving change. And I think, just given the culture of DPR and just being, surrounded by people who were also interested in technology and innovation, it was actually really easy to just like, go out and try new technology. And if it was interesting and it made sense, I think a lot of the people surrounding me were willing to listen and say, oh yeah, like, let's try that on site, or like, let's, so the whole iPad thing. And, I spent a lot of time with BIM as well. So I was really encouraged to, evaluate BIM 360 Glue at the time, as well as, I think BIMX, and there were a couple of other apps to bring the 3D model out into the field. And I ended up working really closely with a startup called BIM Anywhere that's now acquired by Procore. And I just, the culture was really just, hey, go try out all of these tools. And if one of them is really, making you more productive or making you more efficient, why not? Let's try it. Let's pay for a license. Let's do it. So I think it's kind of, I don't know if maybe it's like right place at the right time and company culture, but I just really, appreciate that was my first kind of entry into construction. And I know, not every construction company has the same culture and whatnot. And I think, for those who probably, didn't have the same type of environment, I would say like, nowadays there's so many resources for understanding like what are the latest technologies, like, how are we going to be able to, be more efficient? And I was always thinking, like, if I could make my job a little bit easier as a project engineer, like it would probably free up more time for me to do kind of more fun things, right? Instead of, spending all my time on RFIs, like, could I find a technology that could help speed up that process so I can spend more time out in the field and doing more of the other things that I really enjoyed in construction? So I think with that kind of mindset, and I think a lot of people in construction are problem solvers. So with that problem solving mindset, just like going out there and finding a tool to make, if anything, your own workflow is more efficient. And then I think from there, it starts spreading, within that same project team and then potentially throughout the company.
So what I'm hearing from you is a lot of a culture of experimentation, of willing to try new things, and that helped you feel comfortable in just doing that and just, really going for it. I love that. Brooke, would you share any of your experiences in either opportunity or a story that you have in getting access to this cool new world?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of times within construction, at least in the past, 5 to 10 years, a lot of the innovation decisions take place at the executive level. And a lot of times it's like, all right, we're going to jump into an enterprise agreement with this company, this one. and then pass that down to the people that are actually working in the field. So my experience was similar to Alice, starting as a PE, working every day on those projects, experiencing what those needs and challenges are. And for me, I was able to express to my team and leaders, hey, I see opportunities. I'm really excited about what we can do here. And they actually decided to just move me from being a PE to work full-time on innovation. So I'm really thankful to have that opportunity, and really just be given the challenge of, okay, what can we do? How can we be innovative? And I think it's really unique to have somebody at a lower level, newer in their career, being able to actually tackle those challenges with some fresh perspective and ideas, and also that really recent relevant experience in the field, understanding what those challenges are. There's so much gold knowledge from the folks that are out in the field. So I think for organizations, it's so beneficial to ask those people, what do you think? What are your challenges? I love, Alice, what you were saying, that you were encouraged just to look for new things and try new tools and products. It's a really great way to just get people more engaged. So trying to find ways that you can give time to people to explore those things. How can you set aside, maybe it's a half day on Friday or a few hours where you're like, all right, this is innovation time. What do you want to work on? What are you excited about? Another opportunity that I was given pretty early on in the innovation role was a chance to actually speak to all of the national general managers for Skanska. So my boss basically brought me into this meeting. It was, a quarterly general manager meeting. He's like, Brooke, I want you to talk to them about innovation. What do you see? Where are the opportunities? And, a lot of times those general managers have so many different things on their plate. Innovation's not the top of their list. So being able to listen to me to tell them, hey, this is what I think, this is where I should move forward. That was just a really empowering experience, to share what I thought, and then also just be given that seat at the table to be seen and to be heard. And the last piece on that is, for leaders, supporting your people. If they do something that's really cool, telling your friends, telling the other leaders, letting them know, like, this person is moving forward, they did this thing. How can we empower more people to do things like that? And just, it's almost like sponsoring people to do more of that work. And then my last thought is there's so many good resources for education and learning more, especially with COVID. So many conferences have gone virtual, and there's such good knowledge within those. So if someone's like, hey, I want to go to ENR Future Tech, all right, go for it. Like, letting people that are really excited about those things dig in and learn more. And you never know what they're going to find from one of those experiences and what they could bring back to the job site.
Wow, like tons of great information there. Oh, I want to unpack some of it. Okay, so I think first of all, you were given access both to general management and field. Okay, very important for what you were trying to do. Again, it sounds like another culture of experimentation, and I love this idea of highlighting the work that your up and comers are doing, and just saying, hey, this really happened. This is, look, check out what Brooke did on this job. It's, maybe this could happen on yours. We have just a couple of minutes before I want to take audience questions. For myself, it was being given access to a project. So I knew I wanted to build some technology, and I knew to do this, I did need access. And I couldn't just build it alone in our place. So it was really talking, and it was all men at Anderson Construction. And I said, this is what we'd like to do. And they said, that sounds really cool. How can we help? How can we help you make it happen? And I was, more than anything, more than money, I was given access to people, to projects, to time, to mentorship after that. And I'm just so incredibly grateful because, again, I came from maybe not the friendliest of construction environments. I was in flagging. So I was kind of the first line of sight getting honked at. And I just kind of thought, oh, I don't like construction, which was such a mistake. The truth is I don't like law. Don't get into law. Just joking. Okay. So last, we have some questions from the audience. If anybody else has questions, please send them in our Q&A or in our web chat. But I will ask, Frank Weeks says, what is your perception of architects' adoption of technology? Do you feel tech adoption is being led by design or by construction?
I could take this one. Or Brooke.
Yeah, go for it, Alice.
It's like we both spoke at the same time. I think this one is super interesting, and it really depends on what type of technology. Like, and I think it's also a little bit different globally. So I think when we first talk about technology and construction, I think the first thing was probably BIM adoption, and around the world, in Europe in particular, it was really architect led. But I think what we saw here in the US, I think it's a little bit more contractor led. And I think a lot of it had to do with seeing the value in prefabrication. I think, from the steel manufacturers, that was probably when we saw the first, I would say, more wide use or wide adoption of BIM is from steel. And then I think it came into, MEP prefabrication. And I think, in my experience on the construction sites was, the general contractor saw a lot of value in coordinating a lot of these models before building it out on site. And I think we were kind of pulling the architects along. And I apologize to any architects in the audience that may think otherwise, but this is, my personal experience. So yeah, I think it's pretty interesting if you look at, some of the, I would say the dynamics of stakeholders on a project. I would say, the architects in Europe, they, a lot of the times are also the project managers, kind of like an owner's rep on the site. So they tend to have a little bit more power over the contractors. But here in the US, I do kind of get a sense that just given, contract size amounts and now contractors getting into pre-construction, it's a little bit of a different type of, I would say, power dynamic on the construction sites here in the US. And open to, interpretation or any kind of feedback from, the audience. But this is my perspective, having worked here in the US and then in Singapore, learning about kind of other multinational companies and how they do construction around the world.
That is fascinating. We get really hooked into our US way of thinking, but I think from my perspective, I've seen more driven by the construction side, which is partially why I'm in this business. When I first started doing my augmented reality, I worked primarily with architects, and the process improvement wasn't as valuable as it was for the contractor side. So that's what I discovered. Brooke, what about yourself? Do you think it's more arch or construction?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the type of construction technology. So when I think about LEED and sustainability and living building challenge, I really think a lot of those innovations are coming from the architectural design side. As far as like, how is the building going to be built? What's going to be in it? What are those materials? And those really innovative design elements. That's largely driven by the architect. But as far as a lot of the, construction tech, like the visualization, 360 photos, advanced walkthroughs, things like that, I see that coming a lot more from the contractor side. And I saw somebody in the chat ask, what about owners? I think that the owners a lot of times can really empower, the GCs or whoever else to really drive that innovation. With some of the clients that we have, they may not be telling us like what technology they want us to use, but they're very clearly emphasizing how important it is that we're using technology. And they're like, what's next? What can you guys do? How are we going to take this to the next level? So in some way, it's just like owners that are asking for that, really excited about innovation. With all of our new projects coming up and, the pursuits and the jobs that we're chasing, almost every single client says, how are you using innovative technology? What are you doing that's really creative? What's new? So I think there's a hunger from our clients and our owners for those things. I wouldn't necessarily say they're driving the specific use of certain tools, but they're really trying to fuel the industry towards that and really push people to jumping on board with those new things and showcasing what they're doing.
I think that's absolutely the case. If an owner is supportive, and clearly so, it can make for these innovations. I think one of the reasons I was given access to the project I was given access to was the owner was excited about innovation. They were like, oh yeah, cool. Yeah, let's do this. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions. Tips for tech adoption with a naturally non-resistant, for example, like a non-digital native. I want to take this one because I have all of the naturally non-resistant, and I think is it useful, and have they had a chance to put their hands on it? I think those are the main things. If they have a chance to put their hands on it and it is useful to them, then the adoption becomes less tricky. If it's something that they never get to test and it just it always seems out there, it will never be like, oh yeah, I'm going to try that. Either of you have any tips for tech adoption with the resistant?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what we were chatting about a little earlier, is like, how can we increase adoption? I had a superintendent that I worked on my very first project. Great guy, tons of construction experience, did not like his computer. It flew across the construction trailer a time or two when it didn't do what he wanted it to. But I had a call with him recently and I was like, hey, how's it going? What are you working on? And we kind of realized like he had a need for better onboarding on our construction sites. And he's like, how can I do all of my onboarding virtually? How can they give me all these documents through a digital platform? And I was so surprised to hear that, this person that never wanted to use their computer. But if you find the need, if you ask them like, hey, what's not working for you? How can I help you out with this thing? Sometimes they'll even come up with a technology solution on their own as they're able to have kind of more experience and understanding of maybe what's capable. So I think with that, just again, going back to understanding what do people need, and also trying to, in some ways, educate of what's possible. I think a lot of times people don't even know what can be done. And so just trying to bring about more awareness of what do we have the capabilities to do, so that they can maybe get excited about some of those things, and then they can help be the driver for adoption with other folks too that maybe, are in the same boat as them at the beginning.
Yeah,
those are my favorite advocates, are the ones who hated it at first.
Yeah, and for anyone working with construction tech startups or software companies, like, give them the feedback if their UI is crap. Like, I think there's been a lot of technology built for AEC, not by end users or not necessarily by people who actually understand, like, what are the workflows out on site, and like, how do I package this piece of technology so that it's easy for the end user to use. So I would say, if you're working with tech providers, like, give them that feedback. If it's like, reduce the number of buttons on the screen, or like do make these changes so that it'll be easier for, the foreman or the superintendent, or even for, project managers and project executives who don't like normally see, a lot of buttons on a screen, right? Like, give that feedback to those companies. And if they're good companies, they will take that feedback and revise it to make their technology easier for people to use.
I love this. I love that. We definitely need all of our feedback. We want good, bad, and ugly. Speaking from startup land over here, it does not help us if you're like bland about your feedback. We want very emphatic feedback. I think we have time for just one more question. Okay, I kind of like this one. From your vantage point, how does mass timber compare to other construction technologies in terms of adoption in the integrated design, manufacturing, construction process?
I think it's definitely a little bit slower. And I think a lot of it is, it's a new type of product, and it also touches so many more decision makers. So, you need the structural engineer to approve it. You need the architect to approve it. So I think it's just the nature of the beast of, the thing that you're changing just requires more approval before it can kind of be a more kind of, wide adopted change. So I think it is a little bit slower than, if it was like more of a fully integrated solution, such as, volumetric, like modular construction or something like that, where, a lot of the times for those types of companies, they have the architects, engineers, and the contractors with the factory all in, one company. Whereas for mass timber, I think it's still a little bit more, you have a separate architect, you have a separate structural engineer. Like the GC may, work with a manufacturing company that's producing these parts and pieces. They may have their own structural engineer as well, but I think it's just, when it's a little bit more disconnected and there's more people that need to approve things, it just takes a little bit longer to adopt.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think one of the benefits with the adoption is just the positive reception. And I think people are so excited to jump on board, especially for some of those architectural reasons and just the beauty and the sustainability. So with those challenges, I think you have a culture and like people want to move forward towards that as soon as we can. And I think that just motivation helps to fuel that further and faster than maybe some of the other materials.
Agreed. Yeah, there is incredible motivation. It is so beautiful. Well, I think that's at our hour. I'd like to thank Greg for inviting us and for making this panel possible. Thank you both, Alice and Brooke, for coming and spending so much time with us today and sharing all of your insights. We really appreciate you. To all of the attendees, reach out to somebody in the chat and please do find opportunities to invite women to the table for all you're doing. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Maret, for hosting and moderating.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Maret.
Yeah, no problem. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.